Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me here again in my war journal. Today, I'm going to have a talk with my uncle, Danny Gottlieb. Danny is a children's psychologist, right? Maybe your title is more official. You can give it in a moment. And Danny and his wife Sharon. Sharon is my father's sister. You guys moved to Israel in the 80s, right?
The end of 1986, exactly at this time in October.
Right. I remember when you moved because you shared a building with us,
That's
like,
right.
for a while, and I was trying to remember based on which age my brothers were at the time. I was able to triangulate.
That's right.
Um, but yeah, so they moved here in the 80s, so they've been here for quite a while. And because Danny is a therapist, and this is a period in which, emotional stress is very, very central to the day to day of our people, and specifically a child therapist, I thought it would be, very interesting to sit down and talk to you a bit. And specifically also because, as you'll hear in this episode, Danny also has been part of the really amazing civilian, I guess, organization that's happened all across the country, where people are coming in and helping with the survivors of these of the massacres, and just in general helping people that are suffering from this situation. So, Danny, maybe you tell us just a little bit about yourself, coming to Israel, etc., and then we'll move on to
Right.
the here and now.
Well, we came to Israel in the end of 1986, about 6 years after we were married. We came with two children and with one on the way. And we came shortly after the first Lebanon War, which is in 1982. And we came at a time where just after it was crazy inflation, just when things were beginning to settle down. And really, since then, the country has been in a pretty good economic condition, even in the last years, and even with all the crises that the world has known over the last 10 years. Um, so that for us, it was actually a very good time. We had a very easy landing here in Israel, and we
Mm-hmm.
had family here. And we both found ourselves professionally very quickly and very easily. And it was a very, very good life for all of us. Both my parents were born in Germany, and they experienced the early days of the Holocaust. My father left with his sister on the Kindertransport, which was a program for about 10,000 or so children that were somehow gotten out of Germany and sent to England. And he spent about a year in a boys' home where his mother was somewhere else and his father was in Cuba. And
Well,
then the family was reunited, and my mother was sent to Sweden in 1940 after the war had already started, and her parents perished in concentration camp. So I never got to meet them, but one of my sons, his second name is after my maternal grandfather. Uh,
well, it's amazing that, like, even though we were very close and close physically, and also we were close also personally, I don't think I've ever actually heard that background. That's
right,
very, yeah, of either of your parents.
right, and that's just the headlines. The story is
Right,
much
right.
more complex, but I think it's very relevant to what is going on today, because for a lot of people, the horrors of what happened 3 weeks ago are very reminiscent of what happened during the Nazi period. Quite a few times already, in the press, what happened was compared to the barbarism of the Nazis. Where people were killed, were mutilated, just for being Jews, not necessarily part of any military operation. And the parallel was been drawn very clearly. So it obviously brings up lots of memories for people who are connected in a direct way. We're all connected in an indirect way, but people are connected in an indirect way to the days of the Holocaust. I would imagine that for the relatively few survivors of the concentration camps that are still alive, and most of those people are in their 90s already. Um, what happened was extremely reminiscent of the horrors of Nazi Germany, which I think makes for much more difficult coping, because we know that when a person who's experienced trauma, even if he's able to get over it and able to go on and live his life, when he encounters another trauma, even a small trauma, that much more so a catastrophic trauma that we all experienced, very often it brings back a lot of the memories, and makes the coping process that much more difficult, as opposed to people who have not experienced trauma in their life, and they're able much more easily able to draw on strengths that they have, be it family, be it success in life, be it economic strengths, which are quite helpful in dealing with this undescribable event that, even today, 3 weeks after, nobody has really fully been able to assimilate or integrate into any sort of system of thought that makes any sense. Um like I say, my personal family history, makes what's happening today that much more poignant.
Right. So maybe, since you started with that, um, so really as the child of of survivors,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, not
Um,
in the sense that they were in concentration camps, but they were
right,
very much survivors. Yeah,
for sure. So how other than the obvious parallels and the brutality of what happened and the systematic, attempt to kill people just for their, I mean, they killed also others that were in their way, but definitely came there in order to kill, only Jews. What does that do to you? I'm sorry that I'm jumping in straight into the emotional,
right.
personal things, but
Yeah,
how does that affect the way you process it?
it affects it in the sense that I think that I, and probably not only myself but many other people, felt that we were living in a different age. We were in a in our own democratic state, on our own sovereign state. Even the news from last year and even the last couple of weeks have been very encouraging in terms of the warming of relations between Israel and a lot of the Gulf countries, who traditionally have been very anti-Israel for no apparent reason, because we had no real dispute
Yeah.
with them. I remember in high school in 1975, going to Washington and lobbying against the sale of F-15 planes to Saudi Arabia. It didn't help. But well, it didn't help in the sense that they got the planes, but maybe it helped in the sense that they were beholden to the Americans,
Hmm.
and they never directly unleashed their aggression.
Right.
Although Al Qaeda did have its roots in Saudi Arabia, but so I think we all had this sense that we sort of reached a resting place, where we were safe and we could defend ourselves. And I think part of the uh, difficulty a lot of people are having is this bubble that was burst.
Right.
It's a lot of people had this. Uh, um, I think both religious and not religious people. I think the non-religious people had the sense, that the army is going to defend us, and we have the strongest army in the area, and one of the strongest armies in the world. I think a lot of the religious people had a sense that we were a few steps away from the Messiah, from the ultimate realization of the land of Israel. And I think for everybody, what happened was a tremendous disappointment,
Yeah.
and a shock.
Right. I think one of the things, I think part of it, we, like I processed in the delayed response, partly because in the first day it was the Sabbath, so we weren't hearing all the details, but
Oh,
we were.
correct.
I think I may have mentioned this on this show, on this podcast before, but people have to understand that for 48 hours we didn't have a border. practically. The border was like people were in here going around doing whatever they wanted for 48 hours. Not that there were we now are discovering more and more how many, whether regular army, like special units or volunteers or or let's say national guard type people were basically closing that hole. But that sense, that awareness, that you're talking about a bubble bursting. So that actually is it really is like, we had this thin line, which was the line between civilization and barbarism, and that was breached. And it wasn't just that there was a terror attack. It was the whole sovereignty of the state suddenly felt like it was, wait, what is going on here? And we also now know that there were like secondary and tertiary plans by the Hamas to go further, and that it was supposed to maybe even be coordinated with Hezbollah, which would go from the north. So like there was this pincer movement plan. Like it's definitely very shocking to think of what could have happened, right, if their plans had gone even further from what they actually were successful in doing.
That is true. Last night there was a press conference with the prime minister and a few of the ministers who were in the war cabinet, and someone mentioned the idea that this is like our second war of
Yeah,
independence,
yeah,
and that it caused a bit of controversy because there's some people who I guess see it in such extreme terms, and there are other people who say that's a gross exaggeration because we're not facing a
existential.
existential threat at this point in time. But it doesn't matter because the feeling is there, and when you talk to the people who were in these various settlements, these various towns, various kibbutzim, they felt very betrayed
Yeah,
by the fact that they were sitting in their safe rooms or bomb shelters for quite a few hours, in some cases more than a day, and for some reason the army wasn't able
to get to
to
them,
get to them,
right?
and Israel is known for for being a very well, we call it a vibrant democracy, which is a nice way of saying we have a lot of arguments, and various institutions in the country, also the focus of arguments, certainly the government, recently even the Supreme Court. But there was one institution that was always very much in consensus, and that was the army.
Right.
And there was a lot of trust in the army and a lot of belief that things in the army were being done properly. And it's a sad coincidence that this happened, a day after the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. It being 50th anniversary, there was a lot of reminiscing about the intelligence failures and the political failures that led to the war, and here again we were caught by surprise in a far more brutal
Yeah,
manner,
right.
and not only in a far more brutal manner, but instead of it being a powerful army like the Egyptian army was at the time, and it was a bunch of terrorist thugs on motorcycles,
Yeah,
which makes
the failure even
the
greater.
failure, and it's not only the failure, but it's more than the failure. It's the sense of the national pride
Right.
being hurt, and this hurt that we all experience in terms of our national pride, I think, is very significant in terms of the general coping of everybody, because ordinarily in a war, people come together, and people come together also behind the government, and that's not exactly what has happened. There's people are already preparing the daggers for the day after, and some of the people who bore the brunt of the this attack, very quick, rightly so or wrongly so, I don't know, not getting into that, to blame the government, and it makes for a much more difficult process of recovery. All in all, I would say that the country is very much single-minded and very much in the same direction terms of where we need to go and how we need to go, and very supportive. And a lot of the traditional divisions in the country, left and right, religious, not religious, even Arab Jews, sort of those I wouldn't say they've come down, but those divisions have been suspended for a while, um, because of this sense of urgency, the sense of national, not natural, but national disaster. Of course, parenthetically, perhaps one good thing that can come out of this, and I think we always need to look for the silver lining, is that maybe now the country will have a better sense of how to prepare for a natural disaster, because we are sitting on the on a
The
major
Syrian,
earthquake fault.
I know, the Syrian African
Right.
fault line.
And they always say the big one is going to come, and
Supposed to come once every 80 years or
there
so.
have been big ones here in Israel, not
Yeah,
in
right.
the 1500s, 1600s. There's a big one,
Yes.
but I think a lot of the problems that we're having today, displaced people, missing people, need to provide medical care, physical care, housing, and things like that, are the exact same problems we'll have in a
Right, right.
natural disaster. So hopefully, at least we can learn something from that,
Yeah.
from what's
Well,
going on for that.
I think that I'll just say one thing about that, and then we can move on to some of what you've been doing as your as a therapist. But I think that one of the things that makes that is like an unfortunate tendency of Israel is that we're really not good at planning ahead. We're much better at sort of figuring things out on the fly. Um, that's why I'm not unfortunate. Not that there haven't been cases where we've seen people with foresight. There have been some stuff like that. Like you can think of things like like the nuclear program that we officially don't actually have, and a few other things that we've done that really have shown that foresight. But in general, one of the reasons why Israel is a startup nation and not a big high tech nation is because we're good at doing the quick disruptions, thinking on our feet kind of thing, and not as good at long term planning. But we have had some successes with that. But I'm not. I would like to hope that that's true. I think what's shown its strength in this period has actually been the ability of people to, the civil society to come together where the government is. Look, I'm not sure what government could have prepared for something of this magnitude, but I mean they should have. We shouldn't have gotten this position in the first place. But the fact that civil society has come together in so much, giving and grassroots organization has shown our ability to get as a people, not necessarily as a state, but as a people to sort of to work things out on the fly. I hope that we are
Well,
able to somehow translate that into the government.
I think that one might say that the government has been weak for quite a while,
Yes,
and again, it doesn't matter what you think about
the reasons. Yeah, or
the
culpability.
conflict was about.
Yes,
What I think what was clear is that the conflict and the argument in the public square was taken, run, co-opted by the people, not by the Knesset. The Knesset proved very
that's true.
weak,
That's true.
which I commented to people at the time. It's not good. If it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, but when the battle is taken to the street, so that's very dangerous, because tomorrow they might want to put up a traffic light on my corner, and then now it's okay for me to lie
Right,
down on the street and block the road because I'm
right.
not happy with it.
It also raises the
Right.
question of why do we elect people? The whole purpose originally was for these arguments to take place
Right.
in the parliament.
Because that's but see, people have a limited understanding. They don't understand the difference between a democracy and a representative
Right,
democracy. We have a representative democracy. Not every traffic light is put,
right.
to a vote. But I think also what's happening now is that at least in the beginning, and now the government is sort of getting its act together. I think a lot of the response was really from grassroots response from people, from volunteers, from people, from all walks of life, people who would volunteer to do weddings for free, to to host weddings where they couldn't be, because they couldn't be held in traditional places, to pay for the weddings, to provide food, to provide toys, to provide clothes for people. And I guess it comes from all kinds of reasons. Maybe on some level a sense of guilt, but I think but it's genuine.
Right.
A genuine willingness to help, and then the number of volunteers is immense, which is a bit of a problem because they need to be coordinated. All the volunteer services need to be coordinated. I don't know if any country is really built to deal with something so catastrophic. You had
Yeah.
had the various hurricanes in America, and
Right.
America had trouble coping with it. Um, but again, I think maybe from this we'll learn how to coordinate the volunteer services better.
Yeah.
Just like the army is dependent not on the standing army but on the reserves,
Right.
as we see, and that's working out pretty well, and it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
efficient. So too, a lot of the services need to uh, perhaps be based on volunteers, but needs to be a little more
Right.
organized. I don't think any state, especially Israel, can afford to maintain the manpower that
Right.
is required all of
Right.
the
For a
time.
catastrophic.
Right.
Of course. So let's I think we should like move on to some of the stuff you've been doing as a therapist and
Yeah.
specifically as a child therapist. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about what the past 3 weeks have been like for you, and if it changed over time, if it was like one thing in the first 3 days and another thing now.
Uh,
I'd really be happy to
I
hear.
think that one of the things that characterize what's happening now is that, as opposed to the regular day-to-day work of psychologists and therapists, where they are sitting here and their patients are sitting there, and they're trying to help the patients with their problems and helping them cope better and helping them find solutions. In this situation, the therapist is there together with them, the, dealing with the same problems,
Mm,
the same anger, the same hurt, the same uncertainty, the same fear, the same worries, the same concerns, and I think in the beginning, myself and my colleagues, I think for the first couple of days we were all in total shock, and didn't quite know how to respond, and didn't quite know how to get ourselves out of where we
your own
were.
place. It's almost like
Uh,
you needed to import therapists.
in a sense, yeah, because you need some degree of objectivity in working with people. It's one thing to be sad together with somebody, but
You
it's another
weren't you
thing, you don't
didn't
want to fall apart with
right
somebody.
right. You're usually you want to empathize,
Right.
but it's not the same thing as going through it yourself.
Well, somebody told me the difference between empathy and he's used the word compassion. Empathy is I feel what you're feeling, but if I'm compassionate, I'm also going to do something. And I
Mm,
think we saw a lot of compassion, not just well, I understand it's hard for you, but I understand it's hard for you. I'm going to help you, and we saw quite a bit of that. I think it becomes that much more difficult when I see, like in our institute, a lot of the therapists who work with me there have children in the army. And some of them are children who are doing their mandatory service, kids who are, 18, 19, 21, 22. But I also, have three of my sons who were called up to for reserve duty. So, that concern is there in the back of your mind. And quite naturally, do your best to push it out of your mind, to deny it, to uh, not to think of it too much, and not to spend too much time. But with those thoughts, but it's there. And nonetheless, as we know, when people are dealing with trauma, one thing that is helpful is to be able to do, because you're facing a situation where you feel helpless, and you really are helpless in many senses. But the moment you're able to do something, it helps you break out of that sense of helplessness. Not only being able to do something, but also able to help somebody. There's the famous story of Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a Viennese psychoanalyst who was in Auschwitz, and he wrote several books. One is Man's Search for Meaning, And I think it's in that book that he describes that he's in this concentration camp and his whole life is being controlled by the Nazis. When he gets up, when he goes to sleep, what he eats, what he does during the day, and he had this terrible sense of lack of control until one day he had a little meager piece of bread, and next to him was a guy who was even hungrier than he was, so he was able to give some of his bread to somebody. So there was a limit to how much the Nazis could control him. He still had this modicum of control, and
Agency.
that things like that, experiences like that,
Yeah.
was what helped him
Agency.
get through.
Yeah.
Agency, very much so. So I think that's a big part of what many therapists feel today.
Right.
We are very much in the forefront of this whole thing because of the tremendous trauma that people have suffered, and it's multiple trauma because some people who have families members who have been killed. There are others who have family members who are still unaccounted for, probably because the extent of the carnage was so great that it takes a long time to identify the bodies, even with DNA and dental records. And you have the group of people who the families who have uh, family members who are being held captive, hostage, somewhere in the range of 230 as of today. And that is unbelievable suffering, um, um, and, and uncertainty. And this, of course, just say parenthetically, goes back to previous experiences we had in the Holocaust, experience we had in the Yom Kippur War, which the war itself lasted only about 3 weeks or 20 days, but there were quite a few POWs who did not come back for several months. And, their families lived to this degree of uncertainty. And neither the Egyptians and particularly the Syrians were not known for their strict adherence to the Geneva Convention. Um, but, when you think back, at the end of the day, most of the people who did survive the Holocaust did it okay, and they returned to lives and to life, and they became productive, and they carried a little bit, or sometimes even more than a little bit, with them, in the recesses of their heart, but they were able to rebuild themselves, and
Yes.
that's having that historical perspective and that personal perspective and that national perspective is something that will be very helpful.
Yeah, like my grandfather, Mayor Hershkovitz, from my mother's side. So I
Whom
remember.
I knew very well,
Right, right, exactly.
long before you knew him, in fact.
That is for sure true. Um, I'll just say as a small aside on that, he was. Um, I once asked him how did he was a very he was ordained as a rabbi even before the Holocaust, and then but he continued to be religious and taught as a rabbi and wrote books, etc. Also after the Holocaust. And I once asked him, how did you maintain your belief? And his answer was that he had read a lot and had researched a lot the life of the Rambam, Maimonides. And Maimonides had a really difficult life. He was expelled from a few places that he lived in, etc. And he really had a terrible life. And he said to me, at some point, I said to myself, if Maimonides could go through all that and maintain his belief, then I can too. And what I find about that, I always I always found that to be a very deep and honest answer to say something like, we do things as humans that are almost miraculous. Like we don't understand how we do them, but because we know that they can be done, we somehow do them.
Right.
And it's something
Well,
like that.
first of all, I just want to say parenthetically again that your grandfather was really a man of tremendous faith,
For sure.
in addition to being
Right.
a towering scholar.
Right.
But I think when you talk about faith, I think that's something that speaks to a lot of people. And when I speak to people who lived in the various kibbutzim in the area, and kibbutzim are not known to be bastions of religious faith.
Right.
Some quite to the contrary. But when you listen to the people, they talk about the little miracles that did happen to them, and they pepper their speech with thank God, and which shows that people do have the sense, and it gives them a degree of strength. It was said in World War One that there are no atheists in the foxholes. When things get tough, everybody finds some kind of belief. But I think what makes it very difficult for us, the therapists, to help people today, is that nobody has really had experience with this kind of massive trauma, and I think we all need to be very modest in our approach. That we do not have all the answers,
Hmm.
and maybe sometimes we don't have any of the answers. And I find myself talking to people, and while I'm able to use some of the tools that I have, helping them, vent, air things out, and then finding some kind of new stability in their life and new routines in their life. I think that my experience has been that just listening to them is very helpful to them, and because they have to tell their story, and they've told it 100 times before they told it to me. But retelling it and having someone listen to it receptively is helpful to them. And I also learn, because I think for all of us, mental health professionals, we're obviously need to learn a lot from this. And I guess one of the positive things that's going to come out is that Israel's going to be a major force in dealing with extreme trauma, because as it is, when you look in the professional literature, there's a disproportionate number of articles that are published by Israelis, as it is in many of the other professions.
Right.
And I think this is going to give it an extra boost. Um, but this is something new to all of us, and we need to go slowly because we're still very much in the beginning, and the coping process is a long process, based on what they're saying today in the news, and I don't know anything other than that this is going to be going on for a while, and people are debating with themselves, with each other, do they want to go back to these kibbutzim and communities, and some are infused with faith and with confidence and with ideology, and they're definitely going back, and others are a little more iffy, and like I spoke today to somebody who from one of the kibbutzim that was founded before 1948, and between, I think, in 1947, and between 1948 and 1967, when Israel captured the Gaza Strip from the Egyptians,
Hmm.
who apparently very happy to give it up to Israel, because they didn't ask for it back when they asked for the Sinai Peninsula back. They did not ask for it back.
Right.
And today, the blockade on the Gaza Strip is coming not only from Israel, but also from Egypt,
Right.
because they're more afraid of these crazy people than we are. Um, and this particular kibbutz experienced a lot of border incursions, in those 19 years before 1967, and they're familiar with it, and they're that's part of their ethos, part of their history, and I think their ability to have been able to withstand those incursions and attacks then gives them strength to be able to see how they're going to be able to continue to do it in the future, even though, again, what happened this time was far more catastrophic, far more brutal, far more barbaric than anything that we've ever known. And one thing that needs to be mentioned is that I think when you look at any population, there's probably at least 30 or 40% of the people in the population who, at any given point in time, are dealing with something. They're dealing with illness in the family. They're dealing with mental illness. Dealing with a kid on the spectrum. They're dealing with marital problems. They're dealing with health problems. They're dealing with financial problems. And when you have a situation of this magnitude, so first of all, the first aid that is given by the government and by the various agencies is only to the most basic needs. It's food and shelter. But for a lot of these people, their dealing with these problems continues. People who were people who are in dialysis, people who were stuck in a wheelchair and things like that. And it takes much more time to sort of start putting these things back together. And this particular population, because they were living for so many years under periodic rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip, some of the people developed some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, and this sort of just with this they just revisit that, but you know in a much stronger manner, much more intense manner. So these are kinds of problems that we're going to need over the coming months to give our attention to. Um,
Yeah, and I think that part of it relates to what you said before. I think that part of because this thing affects us for some people, on the most personal way, and also people like myself who, let's say, weren't directly, I don't have thankfully any family members that were killed or abducted, etc. But like on a national way and a sense of just fear for like your loved ones, etc. In general, I believe that part of, in a sense, it's one of these cases where the army, I guess it's true all the time, but that the army and its ability to succeed in the field of battle, and our ability to, within however many months, to somehow wrap this up with a clear victory, whatever victory means. That's already a question of like how you present it, but the ability to tell us that story, right, will be also part of the healing process, right? And the ability to say we suffered a blow and we are recovering is going to be critical for that kind of recovery.
There's no question that the part of our problem today is that this is not an event with a clear beginning and a clear end, like an earthquake. Yeah, an earthquake, you know when it begins, and you know when it ends. Then you wait a few days for a couple of aftershocks.
Right.
That we know that's going to happen. That happens, and then it's over.
Right.
Here we're still in the middle of the
Right.
incident.
We don't know how long it's going to be
And
for.
we don't know how long,
or even what the story is.
And what the story is, and we nobody can say for sure that things aren't going to get worse before they get better. We'll
Correct.
hope that they will, but even the global reality, you have the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and you have Iran, in the background there. So we don't know for sure, which makes it much more difficult to say, okay, to say to people, okay, so this happened. Okay, now we're going to collect ourselves, and now we're going to move on, because the anxiety is still there, and the rockets are still landing. God knows how they were able to make so many rockets, and what positive things could have been built with all that time, with all that effort,
We know.
with all that energy, with
We-
all that material, with all that
We know
money.
we know some of the materials that were used and what they were meant for.
That's right. I mean,
Yeah.
they could have built factories, and they could have built.
They were supposed to have a better sewage system. There was a bunch of things that they
Yeah.
were supposed to use those pipes for.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Mhm.
But there'll be time for that. But right now, I think we're still, dealing with the uncertainty of things, and uncertainty is very difficult. There's a psychiatrist, Pauline Boss, who wrote a book called Ambiguous Loss. Ambiguous Loss is when you have a relative who is still there, but they're not there, like somebody with in the latest stages of Alzheimer's, that physically they're there,
Mhm.
but their personality is totally gone. Or somebody who's a prisoner of war, they're alive, but you don't know much about them, and you can't. It's not that
You can't move on.
You can't move on. Not that they've died, and you can go through the
Right.
ritual mourning process and then
Right.
move on.
We
You're
need
sort of
that.
stuck there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we need to reach that point. It might still take a while, but I think the country is learning to be strong. The people that I speak to, who were involved in what happened down south, and I haven't spoken to many people who experienced the most horrifying things. I haven't done. It hasn't happened yet. I think it's going to happen in the next couple of days. They're able to pull together, and a lot of them are housed in hotels, operated by the home front, which I think to a large extent is based on lessons that we learned during the COVID-19 epidemic, where people were quarantined in the hotels, and they learned how to, manage hotels with people in there,
Yeah.
and that actually is one thing that works very well.
Right.
The problem is, how long can you stay in a luxury hotel?
Right. Right. Of
You
course.
get tired of the food after a while,
Right.
as good as it is.
Right.
Uh,
Anyway, I think that we need to wrap it up. I think
yes.
we have that, but I do feel like we only scratched the surface because I really wanted to hear more details about the kinds of things you've met, and we talked, and the children specifically that maybe you've spoken to. So I think we'll just schedule a time to do a
That's
second
good.
episode, and we can give our the people that are watching a bit more perspective on that.
Okay. Can
And
do
if
that.
you're saying that in the next few days you might meet even more difficult cases, you might have additional insights from them as
Yep.
well. So thank you very much,
Okay.
Danny. I really
Okay.
appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
And yeah, thank you very
I
much.
hope we, contributed something to people's understanding of this.
Oh, you've yeah, at least one person you've contributed to, so thank you.
Great.
Goodbye.